All right, so today we're going to be talking about the journey of entrepreneurship, what it takes at every single level, getting your right hand, and then building a leadership team, getting out of the leadership team and just being the CEO, right? Leading the leaders, and then even leaving being a CEO and stepping into ownership status. So we've got a phenomenal podcast ahead. I'm interviewing Scott Ritzheimer. Scott has helped start over 20,000 businesses, nonprofits, you name it. You're going to hear it in his expertise and the things he shares and the people he's worked with and what he's seen, right? When you work with that many people, you are seeing rhythms, you are seeing patterns, right? You are seeing things where you're like, maybe we shouldn't be doing that, right? That is on a negative path, right? And this is where we're starting to see a lot of people getting positive results, right? So he is a wealth of knowledge. I'm really excited to talk about really, usually when you say like stages of business and you're like, I'm a stage one, I'm a stage this, right? You can feel bad about, oh, wait, I'm only a stage this, right? And he actually talks, you'll get into it, where he talks about there's joy in every journey, right? There's joy in every stage. And instead of just like shooting for the next one, how can you still be happy and really grateful and just in a beautiful place in whatever stage you're specifically in? So I think you will really enjoy today's episode with Scott. We're diving into his book, The Founder's Evolution. And then he shares where to get a free copy at the end of it as well. Enjoy. Hi, Scott. Welcome to Well-Oiled Operations. Happy to have you here today.
Stacey, thanks so much for having me. I always get this like moment of anticipation before we hit record because a podcast literally changed the course and trajectory of my life, radically transformed my business and led me to what I do today. So I always get this like, man, I hope it could be the same thing for somebody.
Yeah, absolutely. And you never know, like, right? Sometimes you're listening, you're like, this was for me. Like, I needed to hear this today. And I bet we have quite a few people listening that are going to really have this topic hit home. So I would love, before we jump in, I've got a list of questions for you. I would love to hear just a little bit about your background, how you got into this entrepreneurial world. And we'll talk a little bit about your book as well.
I have to pinch myself a little bit every time I say this because it's hard for me to believe, but it really is genuinely true. I've helped start around 20,000 different organizations, both in the business world and in the nonprofit world, and started my own company back in 2008. In fact, it was September 2008. Not a great time to start a business. Wouldn't recommend it. But we made it work. We worked out of the basement of my co-founder for years until the HOA kicked us out. We hired all our friends that we could find and ran out of friends and had to hire other people. You know, just the whole entrepreneurial journey. I was relatively young at the time, especially early mid-20s as we're bringing folks on. And I really, really struggled as a manager. I really, really didn't understand why people wouldn't just do their jobs. Why is this like, I've hired you, just do your thing. It's not that hard. And I fought it for a long time. I wanted to do my work. I had my real work to do. I really resisted that for a long time. And it was actually a moment, I remember I was just over at the Chick-fil-A headquarters visiting with some friends and a team there. And it reminded me of a story that I had an experience with Dan Cathy, who was speaking at an event. And I had just like kind of railroaded my team like a day or two before and just like frustrated with them and made a fool of myself. And I was trying to get them to be like me and think like me. And he got up at the stage, he was speaking to a really young audience. There's a lot of 18 to 20 somethings in the room. And he actually like undid his shirt from his suit and like disheveled himself and like messed up his hair. And his point was like, I don't care about who I am. I want to connect with who you are. And I was like, oh my goodness, like I've got this so wrong. And it really led me on a journey of not being that reluctant manager, but really embracing my role, not just as a leader, but as a manager as well.
Yeah. Well, and it's so funny because a lot of us, I think we naturally were the leader, right? We liked to be in charge. So that's just the position we filled, but that doesn't mean we're good at leading others, right? We like to be in charge. Maybe we're a little bossy. Does that mean we're a good boss? And I think I had to learn that lesson many, many years ago of like, wow, no, I just like to step up, but am I actually helping them step up? Am I helping them lead? Because I was the same way as what you're saying. Like, I'm a rule follower. So if I tell you to do something, like, why aren't you following the rules? Like, why aren't you getting this done? Not everybody's like that. And it's up to us, the leader, to help them get there. I am really excited. Let's talk a little bit about your book, The Founder's Evolution. What prompted you to write that book?
Yeah, a lot of my own story, when you help start that many organizations, when you work with that many visionary leaders, you start to see some patterns. Somewhere over the 10,000 mark, I started to see like, hey, is this the same thing repeating over and over again? There's this one thread that goes through each of these stories. And when you help start that many, you see a lot not succeed as well, right? There are a lot who didn't make it, who are gone in months or years. And there were a lot who did succeed. We had some of the fastest growing organizations, particularly in the nonprofit world and then the businesses later. And I'm like, what is that? Like, why is it that some, take off and then stall out? Why is it that some struggle so much at the beginning and then accelerate? Like, there's something about this that's changing, right? It's not a linear journey. It's not, just one step in front of the other. There are hills and valleys in this process. And I was really exploring, like, what is that for founders? What is that journey that we go through? Is it one journey? Is it many journeys? And while every journey is unique, I discovered that there's really just one journey that we all follow. There are actually 7 stages to the journey that every founder goes through, from pre-launch to post-exit. And when it clicked for me, that was like, oh, this is it. It's the same pattern. And then I was like, oh, I'm in this journey too. Like, whoa, hold on. That's when it got very, very real. And so for me, the goal with the book, we have a mutual friend in Les McEwen who did some similar work. I work very closely with him. And he brings up this idea of stages for businesses. And as I was helping businesses navigate these stages, I saw some succeeding and some weren't. And it kind of reminded me to my days in when we were launching organizations. I was like, wait a second. The key differentiator between those who made the leap, who got from one stage to the next as an organization, the key differentiator was whether or not the founder or leader or president or whatever the top person's title is, whether they were able to make the leap to the next stage of their leadership.
Oh, so good. So I know we've not have that much time, but I would love to dive into a few of those 7 stages, and especially, the ones in the beginning where we might not even realize I'm past this stage. Oh, wow, I've made it to here, right? Because sometimes you just feel like no matter how many years you've been in business, like I'm 22 years in, and some days I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. What am I doing? What's happening? Like, let's just sell it all and like move on, right? But then you have to really look at, no, we've accomplished a lot, right? And we really have made it through some pretty big milestones. So I'd love to dive in a little bit and kind of walk through, what does that look like?
Well, so super encouraging for those who are listening. You're probably already through 1, maybe 2, maybe even 3 stages. So you're already on the path. You've already graduated a couple of times now. The journey starts before you launch. And it's something that a lot of folks miss. But in the pre-launch stage, what happens is you are what I call a dissatisfied employee, right? And founders are driven by this question of, isn't there a better way? There's got to be a better way. Yeah. It may be a better way to structure our week and our life. It may be a better way to deliver a product or service or treat our team. There's lots of different motivations for it. But when you look at those visionary founders early on, they're looking for a better way. And it's not until you make the leap, you go full time, that you graduate to stage 2. And stage 2 is the startup entrepreneur, right? No real secret to this. It's just, you're in the game. You're going for it. I half jokingly, but all seriously say the defining question for folks, if you're wondering if you're still in this stage, you're thinking, what did I get myself into, right? Because we walk around with like the entrepreneur smile, right? This big grin hiding the pain that it is to start a business from scratch, but it's really glorious as well. And so you have startup entrepreneurs stage 2. Now, where a lot of folks start to get hung up and get stuck, especially some of the folks that I would imagine listen to your podcast, is in stage 3. Now, stage 3 happens without anybody telling you that it happened. There's no external validation that you have shifted from stage 2 to stage 3. Instead, you wake up one day and you're thinking, what's wrong with these people? What is wrong with these people? And you've usually you've hired a handful of folks. They're helping out. You've got a team. You love them to pieces, but they just drive you crazy. They don't think like you. They don't act like you. They don't own like you. They don't solve problems like you. They don't follow rules like you. I'm a rule breaker, so I expect people to break rules. They don't break rules like you. Whatever it may be, they're just not like you, and that's a good thing, right? Because if you hired a whole bunch of yous, if I hired a whole bunch of me's, it would be chaos. But we're still left with, okay, is that there's a good not like me and a bad not like me. And so we get really, really hung up in this stage because we've got usually some people on our team who aren't the right people at the right time. And then we've got some people who are the right people at the right time, but we haven't embraced the appropriate strategies to lead them well.
Yeah. Oh, man. And here's the thing. So many of our listeners, they have these amazing people, but they don't have the time to support them, right? So when you say like right people, sometimes wrong time, right? It's like the person you want to help you, but you just don't have the time and energy to pour in because you're spread through so thin, right? So good just to hear like those steps and stages and to know like, it's not broken, right? You're just in stage 3 and we're going to get into the next one. So it's like, now what happens if you realize like you are there?
Well, there's a couple things to your point, which are really, really important about the stage and just that fact that, hey, it's okay that you're here. Yeah. The first one is that most leadership books are not helpful at this stage because most leadership books are written for folks who can be just leaders, right? Yeah. They are written for folks who do have the time. And the challenge of this stage is you are what I call the captain on the field. You are leading and someone's trying to hit you at the same time. You're dodging and trying to direct and it's just, you don't have the time to do your job. You don't have the time to do their job, right? And that's what makes this stage so hard, especially when you don't know why it's happening. And it's just happening because you have help, right? It's just happening because you have more people. And those who struggle in this stage the most, ironically, are those who excelled the most in the previous stage. It's something I call the star player paradox, but the more effective you are as a star player, the better you are at sales, the better you are at coaching or cutting hair or upselling your clients at the register. The harder it is to manage others to doing the same thing. The gap between you is bigger and your skill set as a manager has to be greater to overcome it.
So good. Okay. So, and that is huge because sometimes we're like, well, nobody can do it as good as me. So I'm just going to have to keep this on my plate. I've even had people say, I've tried the team. It was a nightmare. I don't ever want to do that again. Yeah. What do you say to that person who maybe went into stage, I don't know if that would be a 3 or a 4, but they're like, let me go backwards. What do you say to them to be like, no, keep going. You want to keep going.
Sometimes I don't. In fact, one of the key things, the very first thing I work with my clients on is, do you have to do that? Or are you happy? Like, can you do the solopreneur thing with a couple of VAs? Can you run the coffee shop counter just in the hours that you want to work? If that's possible, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing inherently better about stage 3 than stage 2. There's nothing better about stage 4 than stage 3. It's not that they get better as they go. In fact, businesses get bigger. They don't inherently get better. The real kind of icing on the cake to this point is when you graduate from stage 3 to stage 4, it actually feels worse a lot of the time. And it's not that it is worse. Your organization's usually more successful. You're hitting those milestones that you've been dreaming about for years. Maybe you've built the team that can take you there, but you're kind of sitting on the sidelines thinking, is this it? Like, is you mentioned that earlier, is this really why I've built all of this? I love coffee and I haven't made a drink in 6 months. I love whatever it may be. So for folks, it's really important to get a vision for what you actually want, not what someone else wants for you, not what someone else said was good or successful. There's a lot of folks who never need to make $1 million a year. They can have extraordinary success, but they don't have to deal with the complexity that it takes to make $1 million a year. Yeah. And so my first thing for folks is, tell me, what's your vision for this thing? I mean, what do you want it to be? Because it's the vision that will either make it okay to take that step back, if you will, to stage 2, or it's the vision that's going to carry you not just through stage 3, but stage 4 that I call the disillusioned leader.
Okay. So good. And it's really hard, I think, in today's world to have a number that maybe is smaller than what you're hearing everybody else talk about, right? If everybody's talking about a 7-figure business or an 8-figure business, it really does take like staying true to who you are and being really confident saying, I'm actually building this size and that feels great for me, right? Whether or not it's everybody else's goal, but you really have to know who you are or you can start to build somebody else's dream very, very quickly.
100%. To me, I would go so far as to say it's one of the primary causes of burnout in founders is that they are borrowing someone else's dreams.
Yeah.
When I see a founder in particular, and there's lots of different leadership styles and types, but when I see that kind of visionary person and I see them really crispy, it's almost always because they're pursuing someone else's dreams and not theirs. Because the beautiful, wonderful, powerful thing about that type of person is when they have their dream and they're clear on it and they have a conviction behind it. It's like the mom lifting a car. You know what I mean? Like and so that burnout thing is usually not a sense so much that you're doing the wrong things, but that you're doing them for the wrong reason. And when you have the wrong reasons, you actually are far more likely to do the wrong things as well.
Oh, so good. All right. What is the next stage? Where are we heading into?
This is we're totally busting the myth that up and to the right is how this thing works, because it really doesn't. There's good times, there's breakthroughs that come when you learn to manage your team well, when you learn the right type of people you need at the right time, and you give them the few things that they need to be managed well. It's like, it's lightning in a bottle. It's really cool. And so you can really enjoy that third stage, even if it is called the reluctant manager. You can become a joyful manager, and it's a beautiful thing. And what happens as you do is you start bringing in more work, and your organization grows, your company grows, you need more help, and that complexity starts to build up. And now you're not just thinking about building a team, you're thinking about building a leadership team.
Yeah.
And the more you do that, I was just sitting with a pair of founders yesterday, and one of them is right in the heart of this fourth stage, this, like I mentioned earlier, this disillusioned leader stage. He was really wrestling with that question, like, is this it? Like, I'm looking forward, and when I look in the rearview mirror, it's just me getting to do less stuff in my organization. But at first, it was like I got rid of things, I was able to delegate, it was wonderful, but now I don't know what to do with my hands. It's like a Ricky Bobby moment. You know what I mean? It's like there's this tendency to feel sidelined.
Yeah.
And that's okay when the team is winning. But what happens when the team starts to lose, right? Because there's roller coasters in all of these stages. There are up times and there are down times. And what happens if we're not careful is we're comfortable being the coach on the sideline, right? Until it gets wrong, until something goes wrong. And then we jump in and try and save the day. And that happens once or twice, and then it happens once or twice a week, and then it feels like it's happening once or twice a day, and we wake up one morning and we're like bruised and hurting, and we're lying on the ground, and we're wondering why people aren't celebrating us, right? We came in and saved the day. Why are you not happy? Yeah. And they're furious with us because we've just undermined everything that they were working on. We got them right to the edge where it was all on the line, and then we took the victory from them. And it's not that we're doing that from an ego standpoint. We're not trying to make it difficult. We're actually trying to be helpful, but we're doing it in the wrong way. And
I'm
so
guilty of this. Like I can feel moments of like, ooh, did I jump in there? Should I have not jumped in there? Like I can see it for sure. So it's so easy want to help, but that's not necessarily how it's being perceived.
And here's the problem that founders have, and this is a big part of why I wrote the book as well, is that move, when you're captain on the field, you do jump in. If you don't jump in, the thing falls apart, right? And so nobody tells you that the stage has changed. And so we're running back and forth across the sideline day in and day out, but we don't know it because we don't see it, because there are no visible sidelines for founders. And who in your organization is going to tell you crossed the line, right? Maybe that trusty right hand who's been with you all along, but even then it's like, is it their problem or my problem? We don't have the benefit that the sports world has of a boundary line, of a big white sideline to separate the coaches from the team. And so while we would never see that in professional sports, I see it every single day in the leaders I work with. The one who bears the most weight from that, the one who experiences the biggest challenge from that is actually you. As the founder, as that person in stage 4, maybe not you personally, but someone who's in stage 4, if you get stuck there, right? If you keep trying to save the day, well, the thing gets bigger, the plays get bigger, the organization gets bigger, and it gets harder and harder to save the day. Yeah. And what happens if we're not
expecting you to save the day? Like, we're hiring these leaders and they're looking at you like, wait, aren't you going to fix it? You fixed it last time. And then it's like, why am I paying for a leader role?
Yes. What do I pay these people for? Yes, 100%. And they're sitting there thinking like, they're just going to come in and do it anyway. Right? Like, why even try? And so what'll happen is you'll actually frustrate and lose your best leaders first. And then the ones who stay around are the ones who are comfortable just letting you kind of fly your founder freak flag, right? And watch the thing happen. And that's fine. You can reach a level of success doing doing that. Many people do, but you cannot break through that level of success by continuing to do that.
Oh, so good. Okay, Scott, you brought up like it might be time to get a leadership team. What are some signs that it is time to actually build a real leadership team?
So these stages are really helpful for this. And the first thing is, to me, leadership teams tend to happen in iterations. And when you look back at organizations who've done this very successfully, very few of them sat down and said, oh, I'm going to build a leadership team. Most of them, what happens is they start running into the challenges of managing their team in stage 3. And they think, I just need somebody else to help with this. And what most folks do organically, and what we can do intentionally much faster if we realize it's the case, is instead of trying to build a leadership team when you have 5 total employees, right? Find someone who can be your trusty right hand, your second in command.
Yep.
And that's a much simpler thing to do. Right? It's much easier to have a number 1, number 2 relationship working really well than building a leadership team or building an executive team at that matter. And what it does though, is it starts to get things out of your own head. Right? When you invite somebody into that circle with you, you have to change how you lead. But it's a light enough step that I've seen most founders are able to do it pretty effectively. You have to invest in trust. There's a lot that it takes to make that work. It's a relatively simple, high return step toward a leadership team. So instead of just going, hey, I need a leadership team, go out and find yourself a number 2, someone who you can count on to help you with the biggest decisions and to help you manage this growing team.
Yeah. And that's exactly what we did in Well Oiled. It was like, it got to a point where I can't do this just on my own. So I brought in a right hand. And then at one point we split, like I split into a couple hats, and then that's how we hired the next leader. And then she split into a couple hats and we hired that, right? And it really is exactly what you're saying. So if anybody's listening and think like, I need a leadership team, but where do I start? I think that's a really, really great place to just start dabbling. And then it'll eventually will naturally work its way out.
It's exactly right. And by taking that incremental step, it sets you up to take the next couple of incremental steps as well. So for most folks who've done this well, especially if they've done it by accident, again, most of them haven't sat down and said, I need a leadership team in a year. They sit down and say, I need someone to help me manage these people. And then they've got that person and they think, okay, this is too much for the 2 of us. What role can we get, hand off next, delegate to next, promote somebody into next? And allowing that process to be intentional but organic, I have found is the highest reliability, highest likelihood of that team succeeding. Now, there's something about this team that's different than what you'll see in a lot of leadership books that are written for later term, right? You're not trying to build an executive team. If you've got less than 25 people, you do not need an executive team. Most people wouldn't call it that, but when you look at a lot of the stuff and how to define a team and everything, it's for that. What you really need is just a team of leaders. You need a group of people who can help you keep the thing moving forward. That's a lower bar in the right way for that initial team. Now, that team won't necessarily help you scale to 8 or 9 figures, right? A lot of them won't, but it's exactly the right team for who you need right now in that stage.
And I mean, as you grow, right? People leave, you outgrow people. They don't want to keep going on the vision, right? Vision changes. So I always used to get so scared of like, well, how am I ever going to let these people go if I know they're not the right now? I'm like, you know what? They may let me go, right? We will find a way, but it really does evolve. So I think we have to be careful with like fixing a problem doesn't exist yet, just fix the next problem. So good.
Same conversation I was having yesterday was exactly that. They're like, we're looking for someone, we want them to be here for the next 15 years. You're not going to find them, it's like, should we do this strategy? I'm afraid they're not going to last 5 years. Well, you can't count on anyone lasting more than 5 years. If they do, wonderful, but the vast majority of them are not going to. And that's not a problem.
Yeah, I was going to say in a good way, it's like, well, who I can afford now, right? 10 years from now, I probably can afford somebody at a much higher level that I don't want them to even be here 15 years from now, possibly, depending on what role you're filling.
Yeah, not in that role, right? And who would be fulfilled in that role is very different, right? Your first sales leader is, again, they're a captain on the field themselves. They're out there selling it. Your VP sales or director of sales or head sales, whatever you call them, that first one is very different than your VP of sales at a $100 million company, right? Yeah. The role is completely different. And so who's going to enjoy and be satisfied in that role is very different as well. And I hope that it brings some freedom to folks. And I think it's what these stages do so well is to say, hey, just focus on winning now, right? And this next year or so, get this right, because when you look at it, that's actually the fastest way to the right person 5 years from now as well.
Yeah. Oh, so good. Okay. So what stage are we in?
Stage 4, the disillusioned leader.
Okay. So where do
So
we go?
where do we go? So to set this up, because a lot of folks get here and they really start to ask questions like, should I still have this business, right? Should I sell? Can I take this further? Have I hit my lid? Is this as far as I can go? Is this as far as we can go? And I tell folks this is a terrible time to make big decisions, right? Because you just don't know enough to make those decisions. And I liken it to Top Gun Maverick came out a couple years ago now, and I was super excited about it. I remembered the old one and all the nostalgia of it. And my wife and I kind of moved heaven and earth to get our 3 kids all covered, and babies, they're very different ages. So it's hard to get a babysitter who can cover all of them, but we're doing it. And so in like the peak of romance, we decided to go watch Top Gun Maverick. And so we're sitting there at the movie theater, and we're at about the point, Tom Cruise has gotten shot down and rejected by just about everybody. He doesn't have the girl. His boss hates him. His wingman hates him. It's really, really bad news for Tom. They're on an impossible mission, and the name of the movie is not Mission Impossible, so we don't know if he's going to finish it. It's a really tough time. He's down on the ground getting shot at by helicopters, and we get the SOS call from our babysitter. You need to come home. Now, everyone was healthy and safe and fine, but kids were screaming, and it was chaos. So we come home, we settle everything down, but I didn't see the last 20 minutes of Top Gun Maverick for like almost 2 years.
Oh my
and if you stop the movie there, it's really rough. It's like, this is not a pleasant process. And it's the same thing for founders. If you stop the movie in stage 4, if you only go that far, right, you miss out on the single greatest transformation that's available to you. You miss out on that heroic turn of events where they complete the mission and they save the day. And for us as founders, that is stage 5. Stage 5 is where we really make the transition from founder to CEO. And that's scary for a lot of folks. A lot of folks have counted them out as CEO. A lot of folks have defined CEO as some stuffy office thing that's terrible. And so a lot of folks will actively resist it, not even knowing that they're doing it. But I've found that most folks, when they really step into that role, when they really understand what it takes to be a visionary CEO, they come alive again. There's this spark that they haven't given any love to in years, that when they step into that role as chief executive, when they build a real executive team around them that gives them the luxury to not have to focus on this month's numbers or this quarter's rocks or this year's objectives, and start to dream again. It brings this new wind of vision into the organization. It creates the capacity for scale, and it highly aligns with how most visionaries are wired. And that's what's available to us in stage 5. I call it the chief executive, and it's a monumental and beautiful shift.
I feel like I'm just about there. We just made our job offer to our 4th leader. And that is like getting the one last thing off my plate. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm going to be the CEO, like real CEO, where I get to do like the fun stuff that I want to do. So I'm feeling everything you just said. I'm like, oh my goodness, that's me coming up in a month here as we start to transition. But you're so right. Like, it's not fun wearing all the multiple hats. It's not, you just do what you got to do, right? But if you can just see the light at the end of the tunnel and know it's temporary, it's not permanent. Like, I just keep feeling relief with every position I've been handing off. And it's like, it's starting to get a lot more fun again. And I think you're right. Like, ending the movie with 20 minutes to go, it's like, don't stop there. Like, it's just, there's so much more coming. You've got to stick around. So I feel that for sure. So I appreciate you sharing that stuff.
Yeah, most founders won't last more than a couple years in stage 4. They'll either sell, they'll do something to escape it, because it's really not comfortable, even though it looks great. Even though everyone's celebrating us and we're revenue, everyone wants to be us. We don't want to be us, right? And so most won't last but a few years in that stage. But once you get to stage 5, I see most folks who get there and do it right, do the right work to get there instead of trying to skip steps or do it prematurely, they can last 5, 10, 15, 20 years in that role and love it.
Okay.
So it's a much, much better fit for most founders. And again, it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. How long do you think somebody should stay in stage 4? Because you're right, it's not sustainable. So then what is like, have you like seen a pattern or a number of like, you've got to get out of there within X amount of time, or you will burn out or want to sell or just get rid of it?
It's a few years. I can't be more specific than that. It kind of depends on the industry. It depends on how long it took them to get to stage 4, right? If it took you 20 years to get there, and it's just, we run out of steam. There are some, I've seen folks who've gotten there in less than a year, they hit stage 4 because there's just like, bottle rocket, like just gone. It also depends on how fast the organization's growing, because if it continues to grow and it's outpacing your growth as the leader, there's a moment of reconciliation coming in. It's usually not pleasant.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, so good. All right, what is our next stage?
Next stage is the one that we've all told is possible from stage 2 on, and it is the true owner. And again, it's one of those things, and I usually have to pause here to say you don't get to skip stages. Right? You don't just go from startup entrepreneur to true owner. Lots of people say it, lots of people claim it. It rarely, if ever, works in the real world. For a couple of reasons. One, it'll either stunt the growth of your business. It'll always keep it perpetually smaller than it could be or that your vision is for it. Or two, you'll never actually get free of it. I was talking with a guy the other day and he said, I work 4 hours a week, and he wasn't fulfilled. But I was like, well, then what else are you going to do? And he's like, I can't really commit to anything else because any given week, something might go wrong and I'll have to work 100 hours. And so there's this whole like own and not run thing, which is wonderful. And I totally agree with it in the right time. And so for those who have done the work, this is why the work in stage 4 and 5 are so important, is because that they actually create an organization that can survive you being an owner and not leading it. And here's the really, really big part of this move from chief executive to owner. And that is that you are not trying to get another COO to run your business and giving them a CEO title, right? The secret to this succession, to being successful in succession, is not finding someone to pursue your vision for the company. It's finding someone to build on your vision for the company. And that requires time. It's not an instant thing. It requires bringing in another visionary leader and investing in them and mentoring them and then giving them the freedom and space to define what's next for the organization. And it's there that you actually completely break free because it's not your vision anymore. It's built on your vision. It's a continuation of that. But I was over at Chick-fil-A and it's not true at Kathy's vision anymore. It is a whole series of people who've all contributed to his vision for the company. And so you have to bridge that gap from being the vision, right, to having a vision. And that's what allows us to step into true owner, to step out of not only day-to-day operations, but leading the organization as a whole.
Yeah. Which I can only imagine the identity crisis that comes with that. But again, like just the next stage and what's after that. So the last stage, we're on 7, I believe, right?
Yeah, I want to go back to that identity thing because it's really important. And it actually starts to hit in stage 5. Okay. The defining question of stage 5, the chief executive, is who am I?
Yeah, totally. Because
you're not necessary anymore. If you're doing the CEO role right, you're not needed for this week, this month, this year. They don't need you, right? Yeah. You are needed for where we're going, for next year and 10 years after that. But it creates in us, it's like it starts to separate the organization from us in stage 5. And so we're wrestling with the who am I? If you don't figure that out, then again, there's a gap and you're going to have to reconcile that. And it usually happens in a very painful way as true owner. Most of the time I see folks who don't answer that identity issue before they leave, they end up, the experiment fails. They end up going back into the organization, and it's usually by some type of force, right? Either being forced back in or forcing their way back in, and it's not pretty. The question though then becomes for stage 6, now what do I do? Right? It's another Ricky Bobby moment. What do I do with my hands? And wrestling with that question, because there's only so much golf, gallivanting, and grandkids that you can handle. And we start to wrestle with this question, now what do I do? What am I moving to? And it sets the stage for the last stage, which I call the visionary founder. And it's where we actually get back into the game purely for a love of the game. Right? It's not because of the income that we need anymore. It's not because of the internal ego we need to check anymore. There's this Greek proverb that says, society grows great when old men or old women plant trees under whose shade they'll never sit. And that's what that role is. And it's this opportunity to return, to come back and to pour in to the next generation of visionary leaders. And in my experience, I've only tasted little bits of it, but in those that I know that are in the stage, it is by far the most rewarding of all 7.
So good. Well, and it's just kind of fun to see like what's next, right? We all want to know what's coming. Is this getting better? Where am I going from here? What's my next problem I want to solve? I think it can be tempting to solve a problem that doesn't exist exist, right? Yet. But it's also good to know, like, what am I getting into? Do I want to get into this? Do I want to keep going on that path? So, Scott, this was so good. We could keep chatting just on so many different things that I was picking up. So, thank you so much for being here and sharing your brilliance. Where can people find the Founders Evolution?
They can head on over to scalearchitects.com. And if you either click on free book or go to scalearchitects.com/founders, you can access a copy of the full book for free. So we've made it all available. It's not the first chapter or anything like that. You can get the whole book for free. It goes through all 7 stages. And there's one really important element that's in there that folks are going to want. And that is exactly to your last point there, which is we can look ahead. And what I've seen a lot of, kind of get her done, visionary, achievement-oriented people have a temptation to do is say, I'll be happy when I get to stage 5, I get to stage 6, I get to stage 7, I get to stage 3, whatever it may be. And what happens is we put our joy on hold and we just kind of plow through the motions hoping that one day we'll be happy. I can't think of a bigger tragedy. And so one of the things that I did is in each chapter, at the end of each chapter, I close with a moment to just kind of pause and look at what is the joy that's available in this stage and only in this stage. There's something beautiful and wonderful and lovely about each stage. There's a joy that's available in every stage that you can't get in later stages and you can't get in earlier stages. And what I've found in all of this is that joy does not come from a destination. It only ever comes from the process.
I think that's so good because we can be very good at delayed gratification. So I don't think a lot of people are looking for the joy. They're like, how do I get to the next stage? And then when they get there, they want the next stage and the next big revenue milestone. And right, we just want to keep cruising. And then you look back and it's like, why have I been doing this? So I think finding the joy in each of those stages is so incredibly important. It also motivates you to keep going, right? To sustain the craziness that entrepreneurship brings. So good. Scott, thank you so much for being here. This conversation was exactly what I think a lot of people needed to hear and understand, like where they're at, what's coming, what they've accomplished so far. So I appreciate your time.
Amazing. Thanks, Stacey. I appreciate it.